Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hey guys, Rod here at A Better Way to Farm, where we increase yields and improve profits. We are excited to be sharing today. It is our 12 days of nutrient season, and we have arrived at day 11. We're going to talk about manganese. We'll get this last one done right away and wrap it up for the year and then reconvene as we take a deep dive into these different things. I wanted to share with you, I have enjoyed this tremendously. It is a great opportunity for me to brush up on things that I should know and to learn new things that I didn't know. And this has been a great trip through these nutrients. And we're going to start in talking about manganese. And the most common thing we see here is people want to confuse it with magnesium. Manganese is a micronutrient. Magnesium is a secondary. Magnesium tends to come from the soil naturally. A lot of us have high mag soils. We can get it through lime of the dolomitic lime persuasion. We can also do some K-mag or sulfamag or something like that. However, for a lot of us, mag is not something that we're normally worried about. The manganese, on the other hand, is something that is really, really important. I have an article that I found that I'm going to share with you guys talking about one person's assumption that it was his silver bullet. And I don't believe in silver bullets, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But just know that manganese is an important nutrient like all the others. Whatever one you're missing, that's the most important one to you. Whatever is your limiting factor, that needs to be isolated and be found. That's where the soil test comes in. That's how we know what we need to do and isolate those and cure them. And that's where yield increases come from. In doing that, we do know that manganese should be less than iron in parts per million. We know that manganese tends to become more available if we have good potassium levels. A couple of little side notes there for us. But as we launch off into the fertilizer handbook, as you guys know, this is one of my favorite resources to go through and look things up and study out of. These guys do not disappoint with their stuff that they put in here. They say that available manganese, and the key here, guys, is available, because if you're doing a Malik 3 test, you're going to have a lot of manganese that shows up. I've seen tests up into the 3 digits where they use a Malik 3 extraction, and it's just too strong of an extractant, and it doesn't distinguish what is truly plant available. So we want to see the DTPA extraction method. However, they say available manganese in soil is related to soil pH, organic matter, and the degree of aeration. Soils in which manganese deficiency is likely to occur would include neutral to alkaline soils, so 7.0 pH and above, acid sandy soils where available manganese has leached, or peats or muck soils. Guys, we're coming back here on this peat, muck, high organic matter soils, same thing. No different than copper. We really can't row apply manganese because no matter what chelator we use, that high organic matter and that high pH tends to really pull that chelator off and then tie up that micronutrient. So copper and manganese are best suited foliar fed. Also iron, copper, manganese, and iron would all need to be foliar fed in that situation. Cereal crops, several bean species, corn, cotton, tobacco, and a lot of fruits and vegetable crops are all susceptible to manganese deficiencies. Toxicity may be increased due to available manganese and may result in acid soils. Liming to create the pH levels to above 6 generally will reduce the available manganese to a normal level. Inadequate soil aeration and poorly drained soils may result in increased levels of available manganese. Crops that are sensitive to excess manganese are alfalfa, clover, cotton, pineapple, tobacco, and several vegetables. We know that manganese is involved in several enzyme systems related to chlorophyll production and the metabolism of carbohydrates and nitrogen. Here we go again. Let's talk about what we've seen already here. The calcium impacts the manganese. If our calcium is too low, then we can get a toxicity of manganese, although I have never seen that. But I know one of the things, it's another good reason to keep our calcium levels where we want them, up into that 6.5, 6.8 pH range. Also that base saturation above 65%. And so we want to be looking at those things. Deficiency symptoms are evident mainly as intervenal chlorosis, which may be confused with iron or zinc deficiencies in some crops. Again, sometimes it's hard to visually diagnose these. In severe deficiencies, the chloritic areas may become gray, then brown, and eventually they may even die. And so we want to make sure that we're not getting into that situation of where we're short. Again, I've come back, tissue test at V2, V3, where you can go in there and do a foliar feed. We don't want to get visual losses. We want to make sure we're taking care of those well in advance, that we don't have things showing up, because it's 15 to 20 bushel typically before we can get a visual read on something. And again, sometimes now manganese and magnesium, those are easy to distinguish because the magnesium will be at the bottom of the plant in the old growth and the manganese will be at the top. But sometimes zinc or iron or manganese will all look pretty similar, and so we've got to specify what that is that we're looking for and make sure we're getting the right thing put in there. As we look into Midwest Handbook here and see what they have to say about manganese, manganese plays a role in many of the vital processes of a growing plant. It usually functions with the enzyme systems of the plant involved in the breakdown of carbohydrate, nitrogen metabolism, and many other plant processes. Once again, when we have the right amount of manganese, we can reduce the amount of nitrogen that we use. Guys, over application of one nutrient to hide the loss of another is never a good idea. And in today's market, we can buy manganese for a lot less money than nitrogen. And it comes back to that whole idea that's in the book. I love that example. If you have rust on your pickup, just putting paint over it hides the rust. But does it fix the problem? Absolutely not. When we have a manganese deficiency, maybe we over-apply nitrogen to try and get through it and get past it. Doesn't fix the problem. And it still has all the other things that manganese impacts. And we know putting too much nitrogen out limits our yield. So as we start looking at the different things that manganese does, we know that it's important. We do not want to be deficient. And we know we need to test with what? A DTPA extraction, not a Malik 3. Midwest Handbook talks about what are some of the symptoms in different crops. In alfalfa, your older leaves are yellow. Your new leaves are yellow with green veins. So it's pretty specific in an alfalfa crop. Something to look at. I'm not going to go through all of them, but in corn, your leaves are going to show yellow and green striping at the top. The stalks tend to be thin. In cotton, for you guys that are down south growing cotton, young leaves are yellow with green veins, and the tissue may become yellowish to reddish gray in between the veins. Small grains, for all of you guys growing all of the small grains, especially up into the Dakotas and Kansas, up into the Northwest. In those small grains, it's going to show up as a general yellowing of the plant and stunting, and your leaves may show a gray-brown necrotic spot or streaks. And for you soybean growers, leaves are yellow with green veins, and the leaves may turn completely yellow and show necrotic spots. And guys, we know this. This isn't in any of the books, but we've been doing this for a long time. And we know that co-applying our manganese when we spray glyphosate results in significant yield increase. Guys, when we spray glyphosate on the corn, on the beans, on the whatever crop it is, glyphosate, again, refresher course, it doesn't kill anything, it starves it to death, right? Starves it to death by chelating the nutrients so the plant dies. Well, it doesn't kill, if we have a glyphosate tolerant crop, it doesn't kill the crop, but it makes it a little bit sick. And we don't want our crop to have a bad day. We don't want it to have the flu for a week. We want it to be burning and churning every day. And co-applying that 1 pint of manganese is a big, big deal and results in significant yield increase. And we do have people out there who say, well, I've got one, I can buy a product that's considerably less money. It needs to be 100% chelated, because if it's not, the manganese that isn't chelated and the glyphosate tie up together. Then what happens? Your glyphosate doesn't work and your manganese doesn't work, and you just spent more money to get less results. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, guys. My desk pad right over there says right on the top of it, it is never wrong to do the right thing. It will always come back to us if we do the right thing over and over and over again. Our handy little Western Fertilizer Handbook, talking about what are we looking for, how do we find these, what are we looking for to see these visual deficiencies. Manganese is closely associated with copper and zinc, and it acts as a catalyst in the plant growth process. Symptoms would include a chlorosis between the veins of the young leaves, the new growth, a loss of color followed by the development of spots of dead tissue which may drop out, giving the leaf a very ragged appearance, and the entire plant may be considered dwarfed. Guys, we don't want to get to the point where we're seeing that. We don't want to see dwarfed plants. That's huge loss of yield, and we don't want to do that. Decreases are never what we're after. Looking at Don's book here, Don Schrieffer. Manganese is essential for chlorophyll and photosynthesis. All these guys agree on this. Its availability to the plant is greatly reduced in high soil pH and cold soil conditions. When the soil levels are marginal, visual signs of deficiencies may appear in the crop early in the season, and if the weather conditions are unfavorably cold or wet, also. Certain crops, such as beans, will show the yellowing effect of manganese deficiency much quicker than crops such as corn. It must be remembered, however, that the crop can be deficient even though it is not detected with the eyes. These are called hidden deficiencies. We have set the soil test for manganese at a minimum of 25 and would prefer it to be near 50 parts per million. You will note that manganese soil levels are several times higher than zinc, copper, or boron. Because of this, it is way too expensive to try and build the soil level that is low. And he goes on to talk about how we should handle this. Manganese may be obtained in a liquid chelate form containing 5 or more % of the elemental manganese, and these chelates are designed primarily for foliar feeding and are quite effective. I would tell you they're also quite effective when row placed with an organic matter that is not above 5, with not peat or muck, with row placed starter works really well in the trench if the pH is below 7. He goes on to say that manganese deficient plants must be salvaged by foliar feeding. That's the only way to get it in there and get it done. If we do happen to let it get away from us, or if we find it in a tissue test, I would encourage you that there's some things we can do to save some crop, make some money, and increase some yield. Before I get into Neil's book, I just want to share a story that I read that someone had written, and it involved Neil, and it talked about a farmer that said that he thought he had found a silver bullet because he had really high nutrient levels and he had applied a lot of manure in addition to having really high nutrient levels. He ran the complete test and figured out that the only nutrient he was short in was manganese. So manganese, which got him a significant yield increase of over 30 bushels to the acre on corn, appeared to him to be a silver bullet. Guys, there's no silver bullet, but there are limiting factors that can get you really big responses. And what we want to do is find those through the soil testing and then through the tissue testing in order to do it. Another test that they had ran was the fact that where they had applied potash, significant amounts of potassium, they did see more manganese in the plant. There is a definite synergy between potassium and manganese. And lastly, we read in Don's book that he talked about the fact that we have, when it's cold or wet, we don't get manganese to go into the plant. And also in those conditions, we get really not good emergence. And so Neil was noticing that certain area he went and the ear placement was up, down, up, down, up, down, which is typically the sign of poor emergence, and everyone knows that. But then we take it farther on through, and he asked the question, why did we have poor emergence? And he said he was believing that the emergence was uneven because manganese was low. And upon further testing in that soil, they found out that the manganese levels was less than 10 parts per million, realizing that we should be up around 50. And he nailed that as to exactly what was wrong and why their emergence was so bad. So guys, if you're fighting emergency problems, I think perhaps we need to think about, going in here and taking a full soil test and saying, what can we do to give that plant every opportunity to get maximum emergence, to get the best start that it can possibly get. Neil writes that potassium is the first key for stalk strength. We know that. The crop also has to have enough copper and manganese. Guys, this is well documented. We know those are the three that make it stand. Those are your plant health golden nuggets. Again, they're not silver bullets, but guys, they are important, and we want to make sure we're meeting that need. We don't want to be deficient in any of those. And here, I did learn something today. I've read it, but I didn't internalize it. So bear with me here. Another problem that can result from too much sodium in the soil ties in with the percent saturation. When percentages of sodium plus potassium in any combination exceed 10%, it will begin to block manganese uptake by the plants. If the situation gets bad enough, it can cause severe problems due to a lack of sufficient manganese uptake. Even when the soil test levels of manganese show to be excellent, this will occur because it is not a nutrient tie-up, it is a blockage of manganese due to an excess of potassium or sodium. So we know Adequate potassium helps manganese get into the plant. Too much potassium blocks it. And we have to add that potassium and that sodium base saturation together, and they need to be less than 10%. And guys, this is a biggie that I had not paid enough attention to. It's something I'm going to start looking at when I'm reviewing soil tests for people, and it's something you should go look at. What does that mean? It means that maybe no maybe to it. If we have potassium plus sodium over 10% base saturation, then we know that we need to tissue test immediately because we could be short in manganese. And we are creating that because of our soil conditions, and it can farm around that. Guys, a lot of what we talk about here is not how are we going to go spend $5,000 an acre or $500 an acre to try and fix something. How are we going to spend $6 an acre to farm around it, to circumvent, to counteract the problem that we have? Guys, if that base saturation on those two is high, it's going to be a whole lot more cost effective just to apply that pint of manganese to offset that and take care of it. That little jewel, like I said, I think was probably worth a whole lot of money, and putting up with me and learning these things maybe will make you some money, and that's what our goal is. So, going on down here, talking about the fact that as for deficiencies, it will depend on more than just where your iron level is, because iron and manganese, this is a repeat, because iron and manganese work together. Personally, I like to see iron at 200 plus. Once I get below 100 parts per million, there's reason for concern. However, if manganese is 75 and iron is 70, that can be trouble. For the best results, iron should always be higher than manganese in parts per million. If manganese is 125, we better have iron that is above that level. And so he goes in depth more on that, but the point has been made, and I just want to encourage you guys, something else to look at on those soil tests. If the manganese is higher than the iron, we may be inducing an iron deficiency, even though we have a lot of iron in the soil. When a soil test shows deficient iron and the availability of iron from the subsoil is unknown, and the manganese is higher than the iron level, or lime has been applied that will adversely affect the iron levels, we need to add iron. Again, it's talking about iron, but I'm coming back to it. We do not want manganese above iron, or if it is, then that manganese is going to create a problem, and we're going to have to add some more iron to it. And it's important to understand these relationships between all of these nutrients. Manganese, not to be confused with magnesium, helps crop in several ways. It accelerates germination. It hastens fruiting and ripening of crops. It is important in the assimilation of nitrates. It is essential for the assimilation of carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. In combination with potassium and copper, it provides stock strength to the crop. Manganese is an essential part of the enzyme system. It is also involved with the uptake of iron. And guys, I wrote myself a note here because we're seeing a lot of people with amino acids. As a matter of fact, on social media, I've seen some really weird, almost hateful interactions. Just a tip for you. When someone posts something that you don't like, if you will take your finger and touch your screen and just go up, you can make it disappear. And sometimes I catch myself wanting to reply to someone to something that I strongly disagree with, and they're not going to change their mind, and I'm going to feel really frustrated. And so I just want to make sure that you guys move on. And I got into one of these. I wasn't involved in the deal, but I just read it because I was interested to see a couple of people were arguing about amino acids, and I'm not going to get into that. I think there's some future there, and I think there's good things. However, let me say this. I think that trying to circumvent the plant essential nutrients is a mistake. I think the foundation, I think pouring the footings is important, and I think the footings are poured by using row place starter and using the micronutrients that the soil test calls for. And then I think, because I think these micronutrients have a lot to do with being able to use those amino acids or to create those amino acids. And I think we want to continually be cognizant of the fact that doing the right thing is always going to pay dividends. Even manganese and magnesium deficiencies look similar. In both cases, the plants turn yellow or white except for the veins, which remain dark green. The difference, of course, is manganese deficiency at the top of the plant, magnesium deficiency at the bottom of the plant. And so we want to make sure we're diagnosing this correctly as we go in here. Another paragraph that I had not used before, but in reading this book, it was this one jumped out and I started writing in it. There is yet another consideration when it comes to using a soil test and not a leaf test to determine a problem. When the level of manganese exceeds the level of iron on our test, the plant will begin to show yellowing or iron chlorosis Even though plants show a definite iron deficiency, a leaf test may show no iron problem here. When the manganese level exceeds the iron on the specific test, it oxidizes the iron in the leaf, making it unavailable to the plant. But when the leaf is analyzed, the oxidated iron is released and it shows as though it was available. So if you only use a tissue test, you may misdiagnose something. I thought that was very interesting. I'd never paid enough attention to this before. Only measuring those levels properly on the soil test can we identify and solve this. So, what did he say? If we have too much manganese in the plant, in the soil, it gets into the plant. We have plenty of iron, it goes into the plant and it oxidizes in a way that so it cannot become available. And now all of a sudden, we have a situation where we're iron deficient, even though the tissue test will show that we have adequate iron. Have to do the soil test too. We just keep banging that drum. Test your soils to your tissue test. Let's learn what we can learn and do the right thing. Manganese tends to tie up in the soil the deeper it is placed, or even naturally as you continue to check it at lower depths in the soil. An application in the aerobic zone is likely the only time manganese will have a lasting benefit for the amount of material required and the subsequent cost. Guys, if you're doing banding and it's deep banding, what he's saying there is probably not the place to put your manganese. That manganese is better suited in the seed trench or foliar fed, and that's what we want to encourage you to do. Guys, this is a big nutrient. This is one of those that I really enjoy studying, learning things like the fact that proper manganese makes for better germination. And I look at some of these soil tests that are coming in, and some guys don't need any. That's why we soil test. Saw a guy the other day had soil test. One field needed 0. The other field was calling for 6 pints. He had multiple fields, and they were everywhere in between. But those were the two extremes. And there is no one-size-fits-all agriculture. There's no one-size-fits-all anything. Make the effort, do the right thing, and maximize that profit on every single acre. That's what we're all about. That's what we enjoy helping you guys do. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate those of you who listen to our podcast at A Better Way to Farm. Guys, we're going to wrap on up here with day 12. We appreciate all of you tuning in.